Today the topic is going to be Psalm 22, the amazing final mindset of the Messiah. Have you ever wondered what Jesus thought during those 6 hours that he was being crucified? You know, what was the progression of thoughts that ran through his head? And there's going to be a few clues from his last recorded words that are going to help us peer into his heart, his mind, his soul during that time of incredible pain, heartless humiliation, and knowing full well that he was about to die. You ever heard people say that their life flashed before their eyes when they had a near-death experience? You know, have you ever talked with someone who knew their time was short? You know, I'm going to show you that 1,000 years before the crucifixion of Jesus, that David saw the highlight reel of Jesus' life flash before David's eyes. And David saw what Jesus was thinking about while he was pinned to that wooden post. This is going to be hard to believe, but you'll see what I'm talking about. You know, David, he didn't just see his birth, his upbringing, and the amazing earthly ministry of the Christ. You know, he also peered into his future. And as amazing as it may sound, he saw our future too. David did. And today we're going to see the amazing final mindset of the Messiah. A little lead up. You know, for a number of hours, Jesus had been beaten within an inch of his life at the hands of the Roman soldiers. And these men were experts in interrogation and torture. And because Jesus had been convicted of a capital crime by the government of Rome, they didn't think of him as a human anymore. And he was really, to the Romans, worse than an animal. And so anything they did went. And Jesus was covered with blood from the savage lashings, and he was crimson red from head to toe. And he didn't even look like a human anymore. He was bleeding inside and outside, and he was dragged to a very public spot. He was stripped naked. That's how they crucified people, to further humiliate them. And then he was nailed to this post between four bad guys who got the same treatment. And it was on a main road for all to see. And there were thousands of people coming in and out of Jerusalem at that time because it was Passover time. He was dehydrated from a loss of blood, and he hung there in the elements for about 6 hours. And thick clouds and winds rolled in around noon, and it became ominously dark and cloudy and cool. And crowds surrounded him. Passersby scolded him. People shook their fist and mocked him. They made faces at him and said horrible things while he was hanging there. Even 3 of the 4 other guys crucified at the same time he was turned on him violently and verbally. You know, Jesus wasn't way up in the air on some fancy cross like pictures show. He was staked to a reusable post using reusable nails, and the Romans were efficient, if nothing else. And so the post would have been just long enough to suspend him and allow the base to be plunked into a pre-dug hole with him on it. Imagine the pain. And Jesus was almost at eye level with the people that walked by. His feet would have been very close to the ground. And they did this for intimidation so other people wouldn't act up. You know, this is how the Romans liked to do it. And his mom was there, his aunt was there, Mary Magdalene was there, and among other of his followers. His apostles had basically scattered and were hiding in the shadows for fear of their own lives, because they didn't know if they were going to get brought up next. You know, same thing might happen to them. They were concerned about their own fate. And see, he had told them for a long time that this was going to happen to him. And they really had trouble believing that. It's hard to think that somebody you know, a loved one, is going to die. And so today I'm going to show you that between battles, King David saw into the mind of Jesus Christ by divine revelation. I'm going to show you what he saw. And it's almost mind-boggling. And he not only saw what was going on, but he was able to feel what Jesus Christ was feeling and hear what Jesus Christ was hearing and hear what Jesus Christ was saying. And David was shown the final thought process of the dying Christ. And today we too are going to see what flashed before Jesus' eyes when he was hanging there, moments before he died. We're going to see that amazing final mindset of the Messiah. So you can turn to Psalm 22, and we're going to follow the clues. And this astounding text starts, it's really all of Psalm 22. And it's interesting, this is right before the 23rd Psalm. You know, the Lord is my shepherd, that one. I shall not want, about the valley of death and all that stuff. This is all talking about what the Christ was going to go through and how we can go through some of our toughest and most difficult times. Now, this Psalm 22 is not quoted in total in the Gospels, but it is hinted at. And a lot of researchers have wanted to say this, but they can't come right out and say it because the Bible doesn't clearly say it. But I believe this Psalm 22 are the last words of Jesus Christ when he was on the tree. And he probably sang it because that's what they did. They sang through their troubles. And so maybe it just went without saying, because it talks about the first stanza and the very last stanza, but it doesn't fill in any of the middle. So we're going to read the whole thing. It's not that long. And David wrote this 1,000 years before, and but it was very obvious to the people of the first century what this psalm was about. They all boys had to memorize all the psalms. They were supposed to memorize the whole Old Testament. Young men, at the tune of a switch from Grandpa. So everyone knew when and where they were supposed to sing a particular psalm. And this was designed for this time for the Christ. Remember in Acts 16 when Paul and Silas were thrown into the dungeon and they sang praises to God at midnight? They were in the death cell. And they knew the exact right psalm to sing at that time. Just like you may have an exact right song you like to play at certain times, right? When you're driving, you want a cruising song. When you're running, you want a certain song. When you're feeling blue, you want a certain song. When you're feeling a little amorous, you might want a certain song. So they knew. See, they sang through their problems, like I said. And, Matthew and Mark mention the first verse of Psalm 22, and John mentions the final phrase. Matthew and Mark also set the time of his death at about 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And then Luke only speaks of Jesus' future plans, which you're also going to read about in Psalm 22. Now, this is a long setup, but I think it'll be worth it. Matthew 27:50 also mentions the volume with which his final words were. And remember, he'd been beaten to a pulp. His lips were probably just busted and hanging. I mean, he was not like you see in pictures. Nobody would ever put a picture of him in a Bible if they really knew. The Roman soldiers, they lashed him with whips that had little pieces of bone or metal or something in the ends, stone, and it literally pulled the meat off of his body to the point some of his bones were exposed. And they wrenched his bones out of joint, which we'll get to. He was not a pretty sight. He was this matted, total bloody mess. It said that they made furrows on him. This went completely down his body. So this is what he was hanging there. This is what people were walking by screaming at and shaking their fist at. This is what his mom saw. And, the word loud in Matthew is the Greek word megos, and it means mighty or great or loud. Jesus literally boomed out his final words. Now, it may not have sounded that good, and that's why some people had trouble understanding, because if your lips are messed up, you don't sound the same. If you've been beat on the face for, a number of hours. And the cool thing that I want to point out is Jesus Christ finished strong. He finished strong. So many of the things that happened throughout Jesus Christ's life and what happened on the day of his crucifixion were seen in detail by David 1,000 years before. And Psalm doesn't just talk about the crucifixion, it talks about the highlights of Jesus' life. And you're going to catch a glimpse of how clearly God can unveil the future. And I was thinking that he can even help us see what we need to see to help us get through our toughest times. So let's go to Psalm 22. We're going to start in verse 1. And it says, to the chief musician upon Ijaleth Shahar, a psalm of David. And this term Ijaleth Shahar is not the name of a fancy stringed instrument. It's a name, what it means is a doe in the early morning light. And this is a tempo song. It's a tempo. It's a beat. And if you were a hunter coming upon a deer, or if you were the deer and a hunter showed up, what would happen? Your heart would start beating, and then you would start taking off. It'd be a certain beat. You see, that's this song. This is up-tempo. Up-tempo. Don't runners, bikers, and even the military use certain songs to help them maintain a specific pace? Sure. I do when I run sometimes. And I once had a boss that would play classical music when he wanted accuracy and rock when he wanted production. It's tempo. And imagine the heartbeat and pace of a young female deer startled by a hunter just as the sun cracked the horizon. The ultra alertness, the beat, the tempo is Psalm 22. Introspection. This is where it starts. And this is going to make a lot more sense to you than maybe what you've been taught in the past. And as we read Psalm 22, watch the progression of human thought. We're going to go from dark introspection to brilliance and victory, from being under attack to being ultimate success. And here we go. My God, why hast thou forsaken me? This is Psalm 22. Why art thou so far from helping me and from the words of my roaring? Now notice how this opening stanza sounds very similar to what Jesus said just before he died. Matthew 27:46 says, and at the 9th hour, Jesus cried with a loud voice saying, Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani, which is to say, my God, why hast thou forsaken me? And, some of you have been taught a complicated lollipop adaptation of these Aramaic words. But let's follow the clues and see what the word really says. People meant well. They try to make sense of these Aramaic words, whereas it's just totally laid out here. It's just when you first get hit, this is what you think. You basically think, why me? Where are you, God? It's just normal. Remember, this song is designed to take us somewhere. It starts from human introspection. And it's going to take us all the way through his life, all the way through his future, until where he has totally obliterated the enemy to the final victory when he says, it is finished. It's not just your salvation that's finished. It's the finishing of thousands of years of work, the elimination of evil, and the beginning of our eternal hope, which includes your salvation. It's so big. It's so big what he did for us and humanity. This song is designed to take people from the lowest level of human thinking through the steps of believing, progressing upwards until deliverance and victory is realized. And the same will work for us. The words "my roaring" in that verse means just a heavy moaning. Somebody in so much pain he just can't keep it in anymore. You've been to a hospital and you heard people moaning in their rooms. Well, Jesus Christ was moaning. If you've been beat to a pulp, it hurts. David saw this. David heard this. And David probably felt it by revelation. And imagine your mind getting the revelation of the Messiah pinned to a post and hearing him cry out in pain. David experienced this by revelation. Verse 2, "Oh my God, I cry in the daytime, but thou hearest not, and in the night season, and am not silent. And I call out in the daytime, I call out at nighttime. Are you listening? Where are you, God? I'm right here. Why is this happening to me? I don't get it. I've been a really good boy." Nobody was a better boy than Jesus Christ was. And look what happened to him. We've all felt like that at times. We wonder if God hears our prayers. Jesus Christ went through this same process. Remember, the Bible says that he was tempted in all points like as we are, yet without sin. He thought that stuff, but he didn't act on it. He wondered, why is this happening to me? Didn't he say, is there any other way to do this, God? Can this cup pass? And God says, nope. Not going to happen any other way, buddy. You see, there's got to be deliverance, there's got to be hope, or there's no reason to believe. No reason to keep fighting. The next step, if they can do it, I can do it. And here's the next step. First we think, why me? Why me? And then it's if somebody else can get through this, so can I. We address the problem, and then we recall or set the precedent. I'm in pain. Other people have been through the same kind of thing. If they can do it, I can do it. Verse 3, "But thou art holy, O thou that inhabitest the praise of Israel. Our fathers trusted in thee. They trusted, and thou didst deliver them. They cried unto thee, and were delivered. They trusted in thee, and were not confounded." Now he's taken himself through this thing. Now this is the mind of Christ while he's hanging there, and I'll prove this in just a minute. He's going, I know the forefathers went through this stuff, and you delivered them time after time after time. See, he's moving past that opening phrase, and he mentions that he feels forsaken. But now he's moving to the next level here, the next progression of human thinking. God, you're the center of praise for all Israel. My forefathers called out to you, and you delivered them each and every time. Now self-image. The song helps us see what Jesus looked like. Verse 6, "But I'm a worm and no man, a reproach of men and despised of the people." Now this word worm in Hebrew means crimson beetle. Crimson beetle or scarlet worm. And this beetle would climb up a tree, attach itself, give birth, and then die. And I have just a little sample of this, if you can see this. These look like fruit, do they not? You see? But some of those are the crimson beetles. And you can pass this along if you want. And so this This insect is still harvested today and is used to dye fabric. People still do it. There even is some in Arizona and Mexico where they harvest this. And David saw the red and bloodied body of Jesus Christ attached to a tree, looking very much like a common crimson beetle. These things would climb up the tree, then they would attach themselves, then they would die, and then they would spill out this red dye, and it would stain the tree. That's how David saw Jesus Christ. Another way to look at it is Christ is going to have an indelible impact on humanity forever. Now, how to withstand a verbal attack. Remember, this is a song, and this is what David saw from Christ's perspective, and that he too could picture the crucifixion by revelation, and he could hear those nasty comments. Now remember, this is just peering through the eyes of Jesus Christ when he was hanging there. This is the progression of thinking. And this is a song that he was singing and probably had sung many times. Verse 7, all they that see me laugh me to scorn. They shoot out the lip. They shake their heads. They wag their heads, saying, he trusted in the Lord that he would deliver him. Let him deliver him, seeing he delighted in him. And this is what the people were saying who were surrounding him. All these hundreds of people that were moving down these roads. And you know how a crowd does. Once it begins to turn and people say nasty things, then more and more and more begin to say those things. See, Matthew 27:39 says, and those who passed by blasphemed him, wagging their heads. Verse 43 says, he trusted in God, let him deliver him now. David heard what people were going to say 1,000 years in the future. Isn't that crazy? It's exact. David saw a vivid live video feed from the eyes and ears and heart of Jesus Christ. Don't you think this might have helped Jesus Christ as he was growing up, knowing what he was going to have to go through? If you already know what you're going to have to go through, is it easier to go through things? Somewhat. I mean, pain's still pain, but if you already know it, then you somehow can prepare your mind. It's because he had a vision beyond this life that he was able to maintain and continue. And so now a mental flashback, verse 9. But thou art he that took me out of the womb. Thou didst make me hope when I was upon my mother's breasts. I was cast upon thee from the womb. Thou art my God from my mother's belly. Now is he talking? He's talking differently now. The tune's changed. Now he's talking about his earliest memories, which were of who? His mom. Nursing. And how he was thrown upon God, how they totally dedicated him to God. They dedicated themselves to raising him to be the Christ. What a chore. It's hard to get kids to take the trash out. Pick up their underwears, much less becoming, taking on this role. It's crazy. David saw Jesus' earliest memories revolving in, what a thing that David must have seen. He probably needed to see it too, so he could keep going. Victory over the wild ones. Verse 11. Be not far from me, for trouble is near, for there is none to help. In other words, God, I'm glad you're close by. You're the only one that can help me through this. Verse 12, many bulls have compassed me. Many strong bulls of Bashan have beset me round. They surrounded me. And these wild bulls of Bashan were free-ranging wild bulls from just the east side of Jordan. and on the east side of the Sea of Galilee, the Lake of Galilee, and what is now present-day Syria. And now Jesus would have seen these things drinking in the lake. He would have seen them when they walked on the far side of the Jordan, or either side, near where John the Baptist baptized. These were wild bulls. Wild bull can be very dangerous. And a wild bull's much different than a tame one. And a tame one is dangerous because they're so powerful. See, wild means wild. Wild resists restraint. Wild does not get along well with humans. A truly wild animal can never be tamed. There's only 14 species of animals over 100 pounds that humans have ever been able to tame. 14. Some animals, a wild animal can be controlled through force and feeding and stuff, but they never can be tamed. And like a horse can be tamed, but its relative, a zebra, has never been domesticated. They've been controlled, but they've never been domesticated. An African elephant has never been domesticated. Indian elephants have been domesticated. There's a difference. Domestication is domestication. Wild is wild. And you can't tame a wild animal. Only control it. And this may have been David's mind picture of Jesus' temptations in the wilderness right after Jesus received Holy Spirit. He might have been on the east side there of the Jordan. That was also called wilderness. There was hardly any cities out there when he went through those 40 days of temptation. And it said he was tempted also by wild animals. It says that in the Bible. You know, wouldn't that after him receiving Holy Spirit been one of the highlights of his life? How he was, and have you ever been through a tough time where you handled every challenge? Do you ever forget that? No, you're not supposed to. The challenging times usually are the ones that you remember, especially when there's victory on the other side. It also could have been a vision of being surrounded by people who utterly hated Jesus Christ. The word strong in that verse, these strong bulls, sometimes is the same word as when it talks about angels or devil spirit beings. And so whatever David is seeing here is more than just wild and powerful herbivores. He saw under the cover, he saw spirit. Devil spirit. And so here it could mean surrounded by a herd of wild men who are manipulated by strong devil spirits who don't play well with people, especially if those people love the light, if they love love, if they love God. There's people out there that are just flat out evil. During the days of Moses, there was a king named Og, O-G. He was the king of Bashan. So there's a connection here. And he was a giant of a man as well as many of his people. His bed was described, and the Bible says this, as being 9 cubits long, which is about 13 feet long, and 6 feet wide. And it takes a big man to fill a bed that's 13 feet long. Now, you ever heard of a guy named Goliath? He was just a mere 6.5 cubits tall. That's about 10 feet. He was tiny compared to Og. This guy was crazy, but Israel eliminated him when they were coming through taking the promised land. And all those giant men and women. So crazy stuff. The King Og was not only a big man, but he was hugely evil. And he hated the God of Israel, the God of light, the God of love with a vengeance. That's what Bashan represented to David. And it's not just talking about the size of a man, it's talking about the size of their demonic influence. And this guy was a king of evil. He was as evil as he was big. And he was like the people who were on earth, as evil as the people on earth before the flood of Noah. The ones that Noah had to battle and to protect his family and all those animals from. You know, who around Jesus might fit this description? Yeah, the religious people. Sadly, the meanest, nastiest people on earth are always religious people. They're usually ones who really get people to go to battle. Still happens today, doesn't it? You see? Now the next thing is we have to recognize who's behind the attack. Now this is all in this song. I'm taking much longer than it takes to sing a silly song. But who's behind the attack? It's important to acknowledge the hurt and recognize who's really behind the attack, or else you take it all personally. Doesn't the Bible say we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of the darkness of this world, against spiritual wickedness from on high? That's where all the problems come from. Sure, that person might be a jerk, and I hate being around him at work, but really there's something behind that. Verse 13, they gaped upon me with their mouths, a ravening and a roaring lion. To gape is to bite. And Jesus really didn't get bit by these Roman soldiers or these religious leaders, but he got bit by their evil words. If you really think about it, you've been hurt a lot more times by what people say than you have ever gotten hurt physically. That's what this is talking about. David felt the pain. Now, Jesus Christ is going through this stuff in his mind when he's hanging there. He has a lot of time to think about this stuff. And, a ravening lion is a lion in a feeding frenzy. You've seen it on TV. Maybe you've seen it if you've been on safari or something. And remember how these religious leaders just couldn't wait to kill Jesus? They couldn't wait. They itched it from when he first started. In fact, they tried to kill him from before he was born, when he was born. Remember how they manipulated the King Herod. He wanted to kill all the 2-year-olds, males in Bethlehem. Imagine killing every child in a city, every male child under 2 years. I mean, that's nasty stuff. That's religion. It's just nasty. When I say religion, I don't mean Christianity. I mean when people put on the shine, when they put on the clothes and they act all sweet and then they'll just stab you, whenever they can. That's religion. It's just man-made forms of worship. Just trying to look good to other men. See, this is how David saw things. And he saw chunks getting taken off of the Christ, which would have been the whippings. Maybe he even saw that. These lashings, it wasn't just a lash like you see on certain movies. It literally pulled meat off of him. That's what this is saying. The bite means words, though. And it's amazing how verse 13 jumps from a wild herbivore to a wild carnivore. Both are dangerous. Actually, more people are killed by herbivores than carnivores. By moose and buffalo and Cape buffalo and hippopotamus and all these different things. So I got too many stories going through my head now, so I better stay on task. And remember, this is a song that was memorized to take you from point A to point Z. How do you get to the end? The Alpha to the Omega. How do you get there? And these are the mental flashes of Jesus Christ, what was going through his mind and heart when he was hanging there on the tree. Now we got to understand why we feel the way we do. And this is how a person feels when the enemy, the adversary, is allowed to run his course and attack you. We've all experienced this in some way, shape, or form. Verse 14, I'm poured out like water. All my bones are out of joint. That's sort of another twist to what Jesus Christ went through. My heart is like wax. It's melted in the midst of my bowels and my stomach. You ever felt like you just sunk? This is how Jesus Christ was feeling. David felt this for the Christ, just like you might feel it for a loved one who's going through a tough time. You see, how do you get yourself back from that? Have you ever had your believing or your heart so low that you just couldn't ever see yourself digging out of that hole? Getting out of that hole? This is the process of thinking that Jesus Christ had to go through. This is what David felt, and this is what will lead us to our assured victory as well. I'm totally drained. It feels like every one of my bones is out of joint, out of alignment, pulled out of their sockets. The heart of my mind, my believing is so low, it's in my stomach. Like you've been scared or you're about to go into battle and it feels like copper in your mouth and in your whole body. You're about to walk into something really bad. Your boss calls you in. Or your wife. No. Just kidding. And, it's a different kind of vision. It's not like watching your television or your computer. Imagine being able to feel what another person is really feeling. Imagine being able to feel what Jesus Christ felt while hanging there. This couldn't have been a joy, but I bet it made David tougher. It can make us tougher. If they can do it, I can do it. You see, good and bad. God showed David this by revelation. Verse 15, my strength is dried up like a potsherd, like a broken piece of pottery, and my tongue cleaveth to my jaws. And thou hast brought me into the dust of death. I'm so dry that my tongue sticks to my mouth. Wasn't Jesus Christ thirsty? He said it, I thirst. I'm thirsty. You ever been so dry, there's no more, you can't swallow anymore. It's not fun. And, John 19:28 says, after this, you don't have to turn there. After this, Jesus, knowing that all things were now accomplished, that the scripture might be fulfilled, saith, I thirst. And this is another fulfillment of a prophecy. God showed David that Jesus Christ was thirsty. And the word dust means gray ash, like what you pull out of your fireplace and dump, and or after you had a campfire and the gray ash, and in that culture, ash is if somebody sat down in the ashes, not hot coals, but ashes. It meant they were prepared to die. They were ready to die. And so that's what this is talking about. Jesus Christ was ready to give it up for us. And like Job said when he was sitting down in the ashes after his 10 kids were killed on the same day, and he lost all his businesses. He lost everything except for his wife that day. He sat down in the ashes and wanted to die. Most parents would. Jesus Christ is going through the same kind of mental turmoil. And here's the real reason I'm feeling this pain. Verse 16. For dogs have compassed me. The assembly of the wicked have enclosed me. They've pierced my hands and my feet. This is Psalm 22, 1,000 years before. How would he know? Revelation. He saw his feet. He saw his hands. Maybe he was looking out like through the eyes of Jesus Christ. Jesus Christ could have seen his feet. He could have seen this stuff. I don't know. I don't know how these kind of visions are, but he saw the feet and the hands pierced. The word dogs surrounded me. A dog typically is not wild. A dog can be feral, but it is not wild. If you take a feral dog and it has a pup, you take one of their pups and you raise it in your house, is it going to be wild? No, it's going to be domesticated again because they're not naturally wild. A dog, a feral dog, is something that has been provoked to be wild. You throw the dog out beside the side of the road and it has to have to fend for itself. Then it starts running with the pack. That's a feral dog. That's what this is talking about. It's a dog. They've compassed me. And they're scary dogs. If you've ever been around feral dogs, they're frightening because they love to kill. Just for the joy of killing. But they're not wild. See, a wild animal can never be domesticated. And these are people who aren't inherently evil by nature. They just allow themselves to be manipulated by the wild people born of the seed of the serpent. They're dogs. And who was it in Jesus' day? Who did the bidding of the religious leaders? Romans. Has our military ever been manipulated by another country to go to war for them and to sacrifice our young men and women for their stupid plan and for their objectives? Yeah. That's seed of the serpent, manipulating that. When you talk other people into dying for you so you don't have to or your people don't, those people are the dogs. They're just manipulated. You see, most wars and armies are manipulated by people born of the seed of the serpent. Now, thank God we have military. I'm not saying it's bad. They're smart and brilliant and wonderful people. I'm thankful for them. We wouldn't have a free country if it wasn't for them. You see, I'm just saying a war is typically manipulated by somebody who are these wild people who will not be controlled by the light, will not be controlled by love. David saw this. David knew this. David battled them. Jesus Christ is well aware of what was going on. We should be aware too. And so on a side note, I wonder if by revelation the Roman soldiers looked so strange to David, so different from the Middle Eastern people that that the people he'd always seen his whole life, that they looked like dogs to him. You ever remember the first time you saw somebody from a totally different culture? It's shocking sometimes. Our culture, it's not like that now because we're so international. But then they just lived in their little world, their 100-mile world. So they could have just looked so bizarre. And plus there was no such thing as Romans 1,000 years BC. There was no Rome. Where did they look different than everybody else? David saw 1,000 years into the future. 17, I may tell all my bones, they look and stare upon me. See, Jesus could literally see some of his exposed bones where the flesh had been ripped away. He could look down. David saw this also. And 18, they part my garments among them and cast lots upon my vesture. Isn't that like exactly what happened? You know, the lowly Roman soldiers, didn't they gamble over Jesus Christ's clothing? David saw this. Isn't that crazy? He saw it by revelation. What can God show you about your life that can help you through a difficult time? Now we're going to ask God for help. At first we're shocked and wonder, why me? Then we realize this attack is not from God, but it's because we have a vicious and a deadly spiritual enemy. And at first we reflect inwardly, but now we're going to turn fully to God. And this is that progression of thinking. Why me? Okay, if he can do it, I can do it. You go through this whole process. Okay, I understand where the attack's coming from. Now I'm going to go back to God for help. Verse 19. But be not thou far from me, O Lord, O my strength. Haste thee to help me. Deliver my soul from the sword, my darling from the power of the dog. Now, this word darling is a poor translation. The word darling means my one and only. And so what he's saying, he says, my one and only God. My one and only God. David transitioned from the word forsook in verse 1 to now, my one and only God who's going to take care of me. You see, does it sound like God's forsaken him now? No, this is just the course of human thought. That's what we're trying to learn here. That's what this song's about. You know, it's a transition. It's taken us from the depth of despair to great victory. It's a song. This song is building to a crescendo now. Verse 21, save me from the lion's mouth, for thou hast heard me from the horns of the unicorn. Now, this isn't that magical unicorn that walks on rainbows. You know, the word for unicorn is the same word as wild bulls, wild oxen. It's the same thing. And to be heard from the horn of a wild ox would be a trumpet that's made from its horn, like a shofar. Now, they would never use an oxen's horn in any religious ceremony. The Jews wouldn't, because it would remind them of the golden calf of when Moses came down from the mountain and his brother had made that calf out of gold, and they were worshiping the golden calf again. So they wouldn't use it, but they could use it for warning or to call attention to oneself. Now we're going to move past the negatives. This is a good lesson. It's good to say out loud what we know is right and true and loving and light. It's time to forget the negatives and move on. Stop talking about the negatives over and over and over. They just keep driving you deeper. Now, Jesus Christ was going to show this here. Verse 22, I will declare thy name unto my brethren. In the midst of the congregation, I will praise thee. He sees himself getting up and getting delivered from this present situation. Verse 23, ye that fear the Lord, praise him. Fear means respect. All ye the seed of Jacob, glorify him and fear him. All ye the seed of Israel, for he hath not despised nor abhorred the affliction of the afflicted. Neither hath he hid his face from him, but when he cried unto him, he heard. So what's he saying that God does? He hears. So this explains the transition from verse 1. It clearly shows the thinking of a mature believer. He knows that even in this bleak, painful situation, he's not forgotten that God is present. God's present with you, folks. He can't leave you. Hope. Thinking way ahead. This is so important. Verse 25, my praise shall be of thee in the great congregation. I will pay my vows before them that fear him. The great congregation is thousands and thousands and thousands of years in our future. After everyone's risen from the dead, after the devil's eliminated, and his converts have also tasted the second death. David saw this future. If you were one of the people standing right next to the Messiah when he bursted out and started singing this tune, might you sing along too? I wonder. It doesn't say that, so we don't know. See, but there's always hope. And we'll all be healed and together someday. Someday. It took Jesus raising from the dead before he was able to be healed from that. It's going to take some of us that. Some people in the world. They'll never have what they really wish they had now, but they will someday. That's the hope. 26. The meek shall eat and be satisfied. They shall praise the Lord that seek him. Your heart shall live forever. All the ends of the world shall remember and turn unto the Lord. All the kindreds of the nations shall worship before thee. This is the future paradise Jesus spoke of to that malefactor. David may have seen and heard that exchange. Is the entire world ever going to turn to God? No. So what this has to mean, after all the evil's gone, the devil's been destroyed and all his minions and are gone, then that's what David saw. The end of the end. The most beautiful time that there's ever going to be, our hope. No more sickness, no more darkness, no more death ever, forever. The clearer you see your hope, your future, the easier it's going to be to handle your present situation. Verse 28, for the kingdom is the Lord's, and he is the governor among the nations. So the devil's no more going to be able to manipulate people born of the seed of the serpent, who in turn are going to manipulate the feral dogs of the earth, who in turn make our lives miserable. See, the devil will be gone. David saw it, and Jesus knew it. Verse 29, all they that be fat upon the earth will eat and worship, and all they that go down to the dust shall bow before him, and none can keep his own soul alive. We're going to eat and worship, eat and worship, eat and worship. Just means it's going to be a great, easy life. No worries anymore. Going to be nice. We're going to have all the time in the world to enjoy our extended life forever. God had to show him that his life was going to show him what his life was going to be like in the future. Or he could never have lived like that. Nor could David have lived like he lived. Let's learn to live like that. Let's hang on to that same kind of mindset. It's going to be awesome. Our life is going to be incredible. Verse 30, a seed shall serve him. It shall be accounted to the Lord for a generation. See, David caught a glimpse of a different group of people, a different style of those in eternity. Not just Jacob, not just Israel. They looked different. They acted different. They had unique duties that everybody else didn't have. I wonder who they could be. Who? Us. David was like, what? I mean, it's craziness. Who are these people? What an amazing revelation. Could those kind of images take you through a tough time? If they can keep Christ focused through that time, that hope can keep us focused through our tough times, toward our ultimate victory. Verse 31, they shall come, those are those same people, and shall declare his righteousness unto a people that shall be born, that he hath done this. See, Jesus mentioned a new birth to Nicodemus in John 3. See, David and Jesus saw us in the future. What a vision. This is Psalm 22. 1,000 years and thousands of years before the end. It's an amazing song from Christ's perspective. This end-of-life flashback and flash forward ends with a tribute to our future. One of the great purposes of his life. You're special. And you know what that tells me? We're going to be special forever. Just like everyone else. We got to be important. We must be necessary both now and throughout eternity. What a hope. What a vision. What a song. Today we saw that Jesus sang and spoke about we saw what he sang and spoke about during those 6 hours that he was being crucified. We saw his progression of thinking and his absolute belief in his future and ours. It's amazing. Didn't this song, this Psalm 22, help us peer into Jesus' heart? You know, his mind, his soul during those 6 incredible hours of pain, not to mention the absolute and utter ultimate victory that awaits us. David saw it. David heard it. David felt it. Now the closing statement of this psalm, this song that's set to the beat, the cadence of a deer escaping to safety in the early morning mist, is almost over. The few final words are that he hath done this, could be translated, it is finished. And Jesus said, I've accomplished my task. I fulfilled my calling. I've set things up for this new generation, this new style of believers. I can even see that I have finished my task and my future job. And just before Jesus dies, before he gives up his life, he loudly blurts out in song the final verse of Psalm 22 and his final statement in John 19. Jesus ended his life. He ended his victory song knowing that it was finished. God bless.